It was February 10th, 2023, a Thursday morning, and the world was buzzing with its usual chaos. The news was full of chatter about a new tech gadget everyone wanted, and the streets outside were alive with the hum of people rushing to work, kids laughing on their way to school, and the occasional honk of an impatient driver. But inside Emma's cozy little apartment, the world felt different, quieter, warmer, like a bubble of calm in the middle of the city's noise. The sunlight poured through the big window by her desk, painting the room in soft gold. Emma was there, as always, with her easel and brushes, completely lost in her art. Her hand moved with purpose, every stroke of color bursting with life. She had this way of making the canvas feel alive, like it was breathing along with her. I remember the smell of paint in the air, mixed with the faint aroma of coffee. That's when Liam walked in, holding 2 steaming cups and wearing that cheeky grin of his. The one that always made Emma roll her eyes, even though she secretly loved it. "Still at it, huh?" he teased, setting the cups down on the table. "You know, one day you're going to paint so much, you'll forget to eat, and I'll have to rescue you." Emma didn't even look up. "And one day you're going to tease me so much, I'll paint you as a clown and hang it in the living room." Liam laughed, leaning against the window. "Fair enough. But seriously, you've been at this for hours. What's the masterpiece this time?" She finally turned to him, her face lit up with that spark she always had when she talked about her work. "It's a sunrise, but not just any sunrise, it's the kind you feel, you know? Like when the light hits your face, and for a second, everything feels right." Liam smiled, shaking his head. "You're something else, you know that?" They sat together for a while, sipping their coffee and talking about nothing and everything. That's how they were, easy, natural, like 2 pieces of a puzzle that just fit. Then, out of nowhere, Liam pulled out a small envelope and slid it across the table. "What's this?" Emma asked, raising an eyebrow. "Open it," he said, his grin growing wider. Inside were 2 tickets. She read them, her eyes widening. "Santorini? Are you serious? Or Paris?" Liam said with a shrug. "I figured I'd let you pick. Valentine's Day weekend, just the 2 of us. What do you think?" Emma's face lit up like the sunrise she'd just described. She jumped out of her chair and threw her arms around him, laughing. "I think you're the best boyfriend in the world. That's what I think." As they started packing later that evening, Emma was still buzzing with excitement. She tossed clothes into her suitcase, pausing every now and then to tease Liam about how he always folded his shirts so perfectly. At one point, she stopped and looked at him, her smile softening. "You're too good to be true, you know that?" she said, her voice playful but with a hint of something deeper. "Don't ever disappear on me, okay?" Liam laughed, shaking his head. "Disappear? Where would I even go? You'd track me down in a heartbeat." Emma laughed too, but the words hung in the air for just a moment longer than they should have. Then, like always, they moved on, caught up in the excitement of their trip. But looking back, I can't help but think about that moment. It was small, almost nothing, but it stayed with me. The plane landed just as the sun began to dip, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and orange. Emma and Liam stepped out of the taxi onto a cobblestone street that looked like it belonged in a storybook. The air was crisp and carried the faint scent of flowers and freshly baked bread. Around them, the city was alive. Street musicians played cheerful tunes, their melodies weaving through the chatter of people strolling by. Market stalls spilled onto the streets, bursting with vibrant colors. Fresh fruit, handmade jewelry, and bouquets of flowers that seemed to glow in the fading sunlight. Emma stopped in her tracks, her suitcase forgotten at her side. She turned to Liam, her eyes wide with wonder. "Liam, look at this. It's perfect." Liam grinned, watching her take it all in. "Told you it'd be worth the flight," he said, leaning in to steal a quick kiss. Emma laughed, swatting at him playfully, but her cheeks flushed with happiness. They walked hand in hand, their suitcases rolling behind them as they made their way to the hotel. Every corner they turned seemed to reveal something new. A little cafe with tables spilling out onto the street, a fountain where children splashed and laughed, or a shop window filled with delicate glass ornaments that sparkled in the fading light. Emma kept stopping to point things out, her excitement bubbling over. Liam didn't mind. He loved seeing her like this, her face lit up with pure joy. "Liam, look at that bakery," she exclaimed, tugging on his arm. "Do you think they have those little almond pastries I love?" "Only one way to find out," he said, pulling her in for another kiss before they kept walking. "But first, let's find the hotel. You're going to need your energy for all the exploring you're planning." When they finally reached the hotel, it was like stepping into a dream. The building was small but beautiful, with ivy climbing up its stone walls and flower boxes overflowing with bright red and yellow blooms. Inside, the lobby was warm and inviting, with soft lighting and the faint smell of lavender in the air. A friendly-looking man stood behind the desk, his smile as welcoming as the rest of the place. "Welcome," he said, his accent thick but charming. "You must be Mr. Liam and Miss Emma. We've been expecting you." Emma beamed. "It's even more beautiful than the pictures." The concierge chuckled. "Ah, the pictures never do it justice. This city has a way of surprising you." He handed them a small key with a wooden tag attached. "Room 12, just up the stairs. You'll love it." Emma and Liam exchanged a quick, excited glance before heading up the narrow staircase, their hands still intertwined. The wooden steps creaked softly under their feet, adding to the charm of the place. When they opened the door to their room, Emma let out a little gasp. It was perfect. The room was cozy, with a big window that opened out onto a view of the bustling street below. The bed was covered in crisp white linens, and a small vase of fresh flowers sat on the nightstand. Emma ran to the window, throwing it open and leaning out to take in the view. "Liam, look at this," she said, her voice full of awe. "It's like something out of a movie." Liam came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Not bad, huh?" he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. She turned to face him, her smile softening. "Not bad? Liam, this is amazing. You're amazing." He grinned, pulling her closer. "I try." They stood there for a while, just soaking it all in. The city below was alive with the sounds of music and laughter, and the cool evening breeze carried the promise of adventure. Emma turned to Liam, her eyes sparkling. "I can't believe we're really here." "Believe it," he said, leaning in to kiss her again. "And this is just the beginning." Later, as they unpacked their bags, Emma couldn't stop talking about all the things she wanted to do. "We have to try the local food," she said, holding up a dress to decide if it was worth unpacking. "And I want to see the markets. Oh, and the museums. Do you think they have those little boats you can ride on the water?" Liam laughed, shaking his head. "You're going to need a whole month to do everything on your list." Emma grinned, tossing a pillow at him. "Then we'll just have to come back." They spent the rest of the evening planning their first day, sharing kisses between sips of wine from the bottle the hotel had left in their room. Every now and then, Emma would stop and look at Liam, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Thank you," she said softly, her hand resting on his cheek, "for all of this, for always making me feel so loved." Liam smiled, his eyes never leaving hers. "You make it easy." They fell asleep that night, tangled in each other's arms. The sounds of the city drifting up through the open window. The promise of the trip stretched out before them, full of excitement, laughter, and love. For Emma and Liam, it felt like the start of something magical, a memory they'd hold on to forever. The next morning, the city woke up slowly, bathed in soft sunlight that spilled over the cobblestone streets. Emma and Liam were already up, eager to start their first full day of exploring. The smell of fresh coffee and warm pastries wafted through the open window of their room, street performers tuning their instruments, and the smell of fresh bread and coffee drifting through the air. Emma couldn't stop smiling, her hand tightly clasped in Liam's as they walked. Every corner they turned seemed to hold something new and beautiful, and she couldn't wait to see what the day had in store. When they reached the square, it was just as the concierge had described. The fountain in the center sparkled in the sunlight, its water catching the light as it splashed and danced. Around it, people bustled about, some stopping to admire the street musicians, others browsing the colorful market stalls. Emma's eyes scanned the crowd, searching for the man the concierge had mentioned. "There," she said, nudging Liam and pointing toward a man standing near the fountain. He was wearing a wide-brimmed hat and holding a small leather notebook, just as they'd been told. He looked to be in his late 40s or early 50s, with a rugged charm that made him stand out. His clothes were slightly wrinkled, and his hair was a little messy, but there was something about him that drew Emma's attention. Maybe it was the way he stood, like he belonged to the city in a way no one else did. Or maybe it was his eyes, sharp and intelligent, but with a sadness that lingered just beneath the surface. "That must be him," Emma said, her voice filled with curiosity. Liam shrugged, giving her a playful smile. "Well, let's find out." They approached the man, and as they got closer, he looked up from his notebook, his face breaking into a small, welcoming smile. "Good morning," he said, his voice deep and rich, with a faint accent that Emma couldn't quite place. "You must be new to the city." Emma nodded, her excitement bubbling over. "We are. The concierge at our hotel said you're the best guide in town." The man chuckled softly, tipping his hat slightly. "Ah, the concierge. Always so kind. Yes, I'm Alexis. And you are?" "I'm Emma. And this is Liam," she said, gesturing to her boyfriend. "We're here for a few days and want to see as much as we can. The real city, not just the tourist spots." Alexis's smile widened, and for a moment, the sadness in his eyes seemed to fade. "Then you've come to the right person. This city has a soul, you see. It's not just the buildings or the streets. It's the stories, the art, the people. If you're willing to listen, I'll show you." Emma felt a spark of excitement. There was something about the way he spoke, like he wasn't just talking about the city, but about something deeper. Liam, on the other hand, seemed more focused on the practical side of things. "So, where do we start?" he asked. Alexis glanced around the square, his eyes scanning the bustling scene. "Let's begin here. This square has been the heart of the city for centuries. Every stone, every building has a story to tell." As they walked, Alexis began pointing out details that Emma and Liam never would have noticed on their own. He showed them a small carving on the side of a building, explaining that it was a symbol of protection placed there during a time of plague. He led them to a narrow alleyway that opened into a hidden courtyard filled with flowers, telling them it was once a meeting place for artists and poets. Emma was captivated, hanging on his every word, while Liam listened with a mix of interest and amusement. "You have an eye for detail," Emma said as they paused in front of a small cafe. "Do you have a background in art or history?" Alexis smiled faintly, his fingers brushing the brim of his hat. "I've always loved art. My wife was an artist, you see. She taught me to see the world differently, to notice the little things most people overlook." Emma's heart softened at the mention of his wife. "That's beautiful," she said quietly. "Is she?" Alexis's smile faltered for just a moment, and the sadness returned to his eyes. "She passed away some years ago," he said, his voice low but steady. "But her spirit is still here, in the city, in the art, the music, the light." Emma wanted to say something comforting, but before she could, Alexis straightened and gestured toward a nearby gallery. "You might enjoy this place," he said, his tone lighter now. "They have a wonderful collection of local art. Some of it reminds me of her work." Emma made a mental note to visit the gallery later. She could feel Liam's hand on her back, a gentle reminder to keep moving. "Thank you for sharing that," she said softly. As the morning went on, Alexis continued to impress them with his knowledge. He seemed to know every corner of the city, every hidden gem. He recommended a small bakery where they could try the best almond tarts, a quiet park where they could escape the crowds, and even a little bookshop that Emma immediately fell in love with. She couldn't help but admire the way he spoke about the city, like it was a living, breathing thing. When they stopped for lunch at a cafe overlooking the water, Alexis excused himself, saying he had another tour to lead in the afternoon. "But if you need me, you know where to find me," he said with a small smile. As he walked away, Emma watched him go, her mind buzzing with questions. "He's incredible," she said, turning to Liam. "Don't you think?" Liam shrugged, taking a sip of his coffee. "He's definitely knowledgeable, but there's something, I don't know, a little heavy about him." Emma frowned. "Well, of course there is. He lost his wife. That kind of pain doesn't just go away." Liam leaned back in his chair, giving her a teasing smile. "You're already trying to figure him out, aren't you?" Emma laughed, shaking her head. "I can't help it. He's fascinating. Don't you wonder what his story is?" "Not really," Liam said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I'm more interested in our story, and right now it's shaping up to be a pretty great one." Emma smiled, squeezing his hand. "You're right. Let's focus on us." But even as they spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the city on their own, Emma couldn't stop thinking about Alexis. There was something about him, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. She told herself it was just curiosity, but deep down, she knew it was more than that. The afternoon sun was soft and golden as Emma and Liam wandered into a small art gallery tucked away on a quiet street. The building itself was charming, with ivy creeping up its stone walls and a little wooden sign swinging gently in the breeze. Inside, the air was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of old wood and paint. The gallery wasn't crowded, just a few other visitors quietly admiring the pieces on display. It was the kind of place that felt like a secret, hidden from the bustling streets outside. Emma's eyes lit up the moment they stepped inside. She had always loved art, and this gallery felt like a treasure chest waiting to be opened. The walls were lined with paintings, each one telling its own story. Some were bold and colorful, others soft and dreamy, but all of them seemed to capture something special about the city. "Liam, look at this one," Emma said, pulling him toward a painting near the back of the room. It was a beautiful piece, simple yet full of emotion. It showed a couple standing hand in hand under a starry sky, their faces turned toward each other as if the rest of the world didn't exist. The stars above them sparkled with a kind of magic, and the soft glow of a lantern at their feet cast warm light over their figures. Emma stood there for a long moment, her head tilted slightly as she took it all in. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It feels, I don't know, like love, like the kind of love that lasts forever." Liam watched her, a small smile playing on his lips. He loved the way she got lost in moments like this, her whole world narrowing down to the thing in front of her. "You really like it, huh?" he asked. Emma nodded, her eyes still fixed on the painting. "I do. It's so simple, but it says so much. I wish I could take it home." Liam glanced at the small plaque beneath the painting and winced. The price was far beyond what he could afford, but an idea was already forming in his mind. He didn't say anything, just slipped his hand into hers and gave it a gentle squeeze. "Come on," he said. "Let's see what else they have." They spent the next hour wandering through the gallery, Emma stopping every few steps to admire a painting or sculpture. Liam stayed close, but his mind was elsewhere, turning over his plan. He wanted to do something special for her, something that would remind her of this moment and how much it meant to her, and he knew just the person to help him. As they left the gallery, Emma was still talking about the painting of the couple under the stars. "It's just so perfect," she said, her voice full of longing. "I feel like I could look at it forever and never get tired of it." Liam smiled, slipping an arm around her shoulders. "Maybe one day we'll have something like that," he said. "Something that's just ours." Emma leaned into him, her heart full. "I'd like that." Later that evening, as they strolled through the market square, Liam spotted Alexis standing near a stall selling handmade jewelry. He glanced at Emma, who was busy admiring a display of colorful scarves, and took the opportunity to slip away. "Alexis," he said, keeping his voice low, "can I ask you for a favor?" Alexis turned, his hat tilted slightly to one side. His face lit up with a smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Of course, my friend. What can I do for you?" Liam hesitated for a moment, glancing back at Emma to make sure she wasn't watching. "Emma saw a painting today," he said. "A couple under a starry sky. She loved it, but it's way out of my price range. I was wondering if you could help me find something similar, something special, unique. I want to surprise her." Alexis's smile widened, and for a moment, his expression softened. "Ah, a romantic gesture. I like that. Yes, I can help you. I know just the place." Liam's face lit up. "Really? That's amazing. Thank you." Alexis nodded, his tone overly eager now. "Meet me tomorrow morning just after sunrise. There's a little shop on the edge of the city, tucked away where most people don't go. The artist there creates pieces that are one of a kind. I think you'll find what you're looking for." Liam grinned, relief washing over him. "You're a lifesaver, Alexis. I owe you one." Alexis waved a hand dismissively. "No need for that. It's my pleasure. Love deserves to be celebrated. Don't you think?" Liam nodded, his mind already racing with excitement about the surprise. "Absolutely. Thanks again." As Liam turned to rejoin Emma, Alexis's smile faded. His face hardened, and his eyes grew distant, as if he were lost in thought. He stood there for a moment, watching Liam walk away, before muttering under his breath, "This will do." The words were quiet, almost too soft to hear, but his tone carried a weight that didn't match the enthusiasm he'd shown moments before. He adjusted his hat, his expression unreadable, and walked off into the crowd, disappearing as quickly as he had appeared. Back at the market stall, Emma looked up as Liam returned, a bright scarf in her hands. "What do you think?" she asked, holding it up for him to see. "It's perfect," Liam said, his smile warm and genuine. He leaned in to kiss her cheek, his heart racing with excitement for the surprise he was planning. "Just like you," Emma laughed, rolling her eyes playfully. "You're such a charmer." As they continued exploring the market, Emma had no idea what Liam was planning, or that Alexis's help might come with more than he'd bargained for. For now, all she knew was that she was happy, walking hand in hand with the man she loved, in a city that felt like magic. The morning was quiet and peaceful, the kind of morning that made the world feel like it was holding its breath. Sunlight streamed through the window of their hotel room, casting soft golden patterns on the walls. Emma sat by the window, her sketchbook balanced on her lap, her pencil moving lightly across the page. She was drawing the view outside, the cobblestone streets, the flower boxes on the windowsills, the faint outline of the market square in the distance. It was the kind of scene that made her heart feel full. Liam stood behind her, watching her for a moment. She looked so calm, so content, completely lost in her art. He hated to leave her, even for a little while, but he knew the surprise he was planning would be worth it. He leaned down, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I'm going to run an errand," he said softly. "I won't be long." Emma looked up at him, her eyes warm and curious. "An errand? What kind of errand?" Liam grinned, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Just something I need to take care of. You'll see soon enough." Emma tilted her head, giving him a playful smile. "You're being mysterious again." "Maybe," Liam said, leaning down to kiss her properly this time. "But I promise it'll be worth it." Emma laughed, shaking her head as he grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. "Don't take too long," she called after him. "I'll be here, sketching away." Liam gave her one last smile before stepping out into the hallway, his heart racing with excitement and a hint of nervousness. He didn't know exactly what Alexis had planned, but he trusted him. After all, Alexis had been nothing but helpful so far. This was going to be perfect. Outside, Alexis was waiting in an old, slightly battered car. The paint was faded, and one of the side mirrors was cracked, but Alexis didn't seem to notice or care. He leaned against the car, his hat pulled low over his face, his notebook tucked under one arm. When he saw Liam, he straightened up, giving him a small nod. "Ready?" Alexis asked, his voice calm but lacking its usual warmth. "Yeah," Liam said, climbing into the passenger seat. "Thanks again for helping me with this. I really appreciate it." Alexis gave a tight smile as he started the car. "It's no trouble. I told you, I know just the place." The car rumbled to life, and they pulled away from the hotel, the streets bustling with early morning activity. At first, the drive was pleasant. They passed through familiar parts of the city, the kind of places Liam and Emma had explored together, the market square, the little cafes, the charming boutiques. But as they drove further, the streets began to change. They became narrower, quieter, the buildings older and more run down. The lively energy of the city faded, replaced by an eerie stillness. Liam shifted in his seat, glancing out the window. "This is a little out of the way, isn't it?" Alexis didn't look at him, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. "The best art is often hidden," he said, his tone flat. "The artist I'm taking you to doesn't like crowds. He works in private." Liam nodded, though a small knot of unease was beginning to form in his stomach. He didn't want to seem ungrateful, so he stayed quiet, watching as the streets grew emptier and the buildings more dilapidated. Finally, Alexis pulled the car to a stop in front of an old, abandoned-looking building. The windows were boarded up, and the paint was peeling from the walls. The air felt colder here, damp and heavy. "This is it," Alexis said, turning off the engine. He got out of the car without waiting for Liam, motioning for him to follow. Liam hesitated for a moment, then climbed out, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Are you sure this is the right place?" he asked, his voice uncertain. Alexis nodded, his expression unreadable. "The artist prefers his privacy. Come on." They stepped inside, the door creaking loudly as it swung open. The air inside was damp and cold, carrying the faint smell of mildew. The only sound was the distant drip of water echoing through the empty space. The walls were bare, the floors covered in dust and debris. Liam's unease grew stronger, but he told himself to trust Alexis. This was all part of the experience, right? "Where's the artist?" Liam asked, his voice echoing slightly in the empty room. Alexis turned to him, his face shadowed in the dim light. He gave a small, forced smile. "He'll be here soon. Just wait." Before Liam could respond, Alexis moved quickly, his movements sharp and deliberate. Before Liam could react, he felt a sharp blow to the back of his head. Pain exploded in his skull, and the world spun around him. He stumbled, his vision blurring, and then everything went black. The last thing he heard was the sound of his phone hitting the ground, the echo ringing out in the silence. When Liam woke up, his head was pounding, and his body felt heavy. He blinked, trying to focus, but the room was dimly lit, the shadows dancing on the walls. He realized he was restrained, his wrists tied tightly to the arms of a chair. Panic surged through him as he struggled against the bindings, but they didn't budge. "Don't bother," a voice said from the shadows. "You won't get out." Liam froze, his heart racing. Alexis stepped into the light, his face calm but his eyes filled with something dark and heavy. He pulled up a chair and sat down across from Liam, his hat resting on his knee. "What the hell is this?" Liam demanded, his voice hoarse. "What are you doing?" Alexis didn't answer right away. He looked at Liam for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I didn't want it to come to this," he said quietly. "But I don't have a choice." Liam stared at him, his mind racing. "What are you talking about? What's going on?" Alexis leaned back in his chair, his voice heavy with bitterness. "Years ago, my wife was diagnosed with cancer. She was everything to me, my whole world. I would have done anything to save her, and I did. I borrowed money from people I shouldn't have, dangerous people, to pay for her treatment." Liam's breath caught in his throat, but he didn't say anything. He could see the pain in Alexis's eyes, the way his voice trembled as he spoke. "She didn't make it," Alexis continued, his voice breaking. "She died, and I was left with nothing. Nothing but a mountain of debt and a daughter to protect. The people I borrowed from didn't care about my loss. They wanted their money, and when I couldn't pay, they threatened to kill my little girl." Liam's stomach turned as Alexis's words sank in. "So what? You're doing this for them?" Alexis nodded, his jaw tightening. They forced me into this. Organ trafficking. Wealthy tourists like you, people who won't be missed for long. It's the only way to keep my daughter safe. Liam's heart pounded in his chest. You don't have to do this, he said, his voice desperate. We can figure something out. There has to be another way. Alexis shook his head, his eyes filled with anguish. You'd do the same if it were your family. Don't pretend you wouldn't. Liam struggled against his restraints, his mind racing for a way out. But Alexis just sat there, his face a mask of pain and regret. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence broken only by the faint sound of dripping water. The morning passed slowly, the sunlight shifting across the walls of the hotel room as Emma sat by the window, sketching. She had been so caught up in her drawing that she hadn't noticed how much time had gone by. When she finally glanced at the clock, her brow furrowed. Liam had been gone for hours. He'd said he wouldn't be long, and yet the day was already slipping into the afternoon. She set her sketchbook aside and reached for her phone, scrolling to Liam's number. The call rang once, then went straight to voicemail. She frowned, trying again, but the result was the same. A knot of unease began to form in her stomach. Liam was always good about answering his phone, even if he was busy. She told herself not to panic. Maybe his phone had died, or he was caught up in whatever errand he was running. Still, the silence felt heavy. Emma stood and began pacing the room, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She tried to distract herself by tidying up, folding the clothes they'd left scattered from the night before, but her mind kept circling back to Liam. Where was he? Why hadn't he called? By the time the sun began to dip lower in the sky, Emma couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed her phone and headed downstairs to the lobby, her heart pounding. The concierge, the same friendly man who had greeted them when they arrived, looked up as she approached. "Excuse me," Emma said, her voice tight with worry. "Have you seen Liam, my boyfriend? He left this morning, and he hasn't come back." The concierge frowned, thinking for a moment. "I believe I saw him leave with Alexis earlier," he said. "They drove off together." Emma's stomach dropped. "Alexis? Are you sure?" The concierge nodded. "Yes, I'm certain. Is something wrong?" Emma hesitated, her mind racing. "I don't know. I've been trying to call him, but he's not answering. Do you have a way to contact Alexis?" The concierge shook his head. "I'm afraid not. He doesn't have a phone, at least not one he shares with anyone. He's a bit old-fashioned." Emma's unease deepened. She thanked the concierge and stepped outside, the cool evening air doing little to calm her nerves. She tried calling Liam again, but it went straight to voicemail just like before. Her fingers hovered over her phone, debating what to do next. Then she remembered the gallery, the place where Liam had first asked about the painting. Maybe someone there would know something. The gallery was quiet when Emma arrived, the soft hum of classical music playing in the background. The owner, a kind-looking older woman with silver hair and glasses, greeted her warmly. "Welcome back," the woman said, recognizing Emma from the day before. "Did you come to see the painting again?" Emma shook her head, her voice trembling slightly. "Actually, I'm looking for my boyfriend. He was here yesterday, asking about the painting of the couple under the stars. He left this morning with a guide named Alexis, and I haven't heard from him since." The owner's expression shifted, her smile fading. "Alexis?" she repeated, her tone cautious. "Yes," Emma said, her worry growing. Do you know him? The woman sighed, glancing around as if to make sure no one else was listening. I do. He used to be one of the best guides in the city, but he's not the same anymore. Ever since his wife passed, he's been different. Emma's heart sank. What do you mean? The owner hesitated, then leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. He's not a legitimate guide anymore. He doesn't work with the city or any of the official agencies. Some people say he's harmless, just a man grieving in his own way. But others, well, let's just say I'd stay away from him if I were you. Emma's hands tightened into fists at her sides. But Liam's with him. What if something's happened? The owner gave her a sympathetic look. I don't know, dear, but if I were you, I'd go to the police. Emma didn't waste any time. She hurried to the nearest police station, her heart pounding in her chest. The station was small and dimly lit, with a few officers sitting behind desks, typing away at computers. She approached the front desk, her voice shaking as she explained the situation. My boyfriend is missing, she said. He left this morning with a guide named Alexis, and I haven't heard from him since. I think something might have happened to him. The officer behind the desk, a middle-aged man with a tired expression, listened patiently but didn't seem particularly concerned. How long has he been gone? He asked. Hours, Emma said. He said he'd be back soon, but it's almost evening now. He's not answering his phone, and the hotel staff said he left with Alexis. The officer sighed, leaning back in his chair. It's not uncommon for tourists to lose track of time. He's probably just exploring the city. Maybe his phone died. Emma's frustration bubbled over. No, you don't understand. Liam wouldn't just disappear like this. Something's wrong. Please, can't you do something? The officer gave her a sympathetic look but shook his head. We can file a report, but unless there's evidence of foul play, there's not much we can do. He's an adult. He could have wandered off, gotten lost, or decided to go somewhere on his own. Emma felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. You're not going to help me? I'm sorry, the officer said. If he doesn't turn up by tomorrow, come back, and we'll take another look. Emma left the station feeling more desperate than ever. She couldn't just sit around and wait. If the police weren't going to help, she'd have to figure this out on her own. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Emma retraced her steps through the city, starting with the gallery and moving toward the market square. She asked anyone who would listen if they'd seen Liam or Alexis, but no one had any answers. The streets, which had felt so magical and inviting just a day ago, now seemed cold and unfamiliar. The crowds felt overwhelming, the noise grating on her nerves. As she walked, a strange feeling began to creep over her. It started as a faint prickling at the back of her neck, like the sensation of being watched. She glanced over her shoulder, but the street behind her was empty, just a few people hurrying home for the evening. She shook her head, telling herself she was imagining things, but the feeling didn't go away. She turned down a quieter street, her footsteps echoing against the stone walls. The shadows were longer here, the light from the street lamps flickering faintly. She glanced back again, and this time she thought she saw movement. A figure in the distance, just barely visible before disappearing around a corner. Her heart began to race. She quickened her pace, her eyes darting around nervously. The driver frowned, scratching his chin. Alexis, huh? I've heard of him. Don't know him personally, but I've seen his car around. Old, beat-up thing, right? Emma nodded quickly, hope sparking in her chest. Yes, that's it. Do you know where they might have gone? The driver hesitated, glancing around as if to make sure no one was listening. I saw a car like that heading toward the outskirts of the city earlier. There's not much out there except abandoned buildings and trouble. It's not a place you want to go, miss. Emma's heart sank, but she refused to back down. Please, she said, her voice firm. I need to find him. I'll pay you whatever you want. Just take me there. The driver sighed, clearly torn. It's dangerous, he said. That part of the city. People don't come back from there sometimes. I don't care, Emma said, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside her. I have to find him. The driver studied her for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. All right, get in. The cab rattled as it made its way through the city, the streets growing darker and more desolate with every turn. The lively energy of the market square was long behind them, replaced by crumbling buildings and empty roads. Emma stared out the window, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his expression grim. You're brave, he said after a long silence. Or maybe just desperate. My boyfriend, he went missing after meeting a man named Alexis. Do you know anything about him? The woman's eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked like she might cry. Alexis, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He took my partner too. Emma's heart clenched. What happened? Did you find him? The woman shook her head, her expression filled with despair. No, I tried. I went to the police, I searched everywhere, but it was like he vanished. Alexis, he's not who he seems. He pretends to be helpful, kind, but he's dangerous. If you're going after him, be careful. You might not come back. Emma swallowed hard, her resolve hardening. I don't have a choice, she said. I have to find him. The woman reached out, gripping Emma's arm tightly. Then don't trust him. Whatever he says, don't believe it. Emma nodded, her chest tight with fear and determination. She thanked the woman and got back into the cab, her mind racing as they continued down the road. The cab finally came to a stop in front of a large, abandoned building. It loomed in the darkness, its windows shattered and its walls covered in graffiti. The air was cold and damp, and the only sound was the faint rustling of the wind through the broken glass. This is it, the driver said, his voice low. Are you sure about this? Emma nodded, her hands trembling as she opened the door. Thank you, she said. Wait here. I might need a ride back. The driver gave her a wary look but didn't argue. Be careful, he said, and don't take too long. Emma stepped out of the car, her heart pounding as she approached the building. The door creaked loudly as she pushed it open, the sound echoing through the empty halls. The air inside was damp and cold, carrying the faint smell of mildew and something metallic. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside, her footsteps soft against the dusty floor. The corridors were dark and winding, each one looking more ominous than the last. Emma's breath came in short, shallow gasps as she moved deeper into the building, her eyes darting around for any sign of Liam. She turned a corner and froze, her stomach lurching at the sight before her. A small room was filled with medical equipment, surgical abilities, 4 bags, and blood-stained sheets. A pile of passports sat on a table, each one belonging to a different person. Emma's hands shook as she picked one up, her mind racing. These were people just like Liam, who had come here and never left. She forced herself to keep moving, her fear giving way to determination. She turned another corner and saw him, Liam, slumped in a chair, his wrists and ankles restrained. His head hung low, and he wasn't moving. "Liam," Emma whispered, rushing to his side. She reached out to touch his face, relief flooding through her when she felt the warmth of his skin. "Liam, wake up, please." Before she could untie him, a voice spoke from the shadows. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Emma spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Alexis stepped into the light, his face calm but his eyes cold. He held a knife in one hand, the blade glinting in the dim light. "Alexis," Emma said, her voice shaking, "let him go, please." Alexis tilted his head, studying her. "You shouldn't have come here," he said. "You don't understand what you're getting yourself into." "I understand enough," Emma said, her fear giving way to anger. "You're hurting people. You're killing them. Why are you doing this?" Alexis's expression darkened, his voice bitter. "Because love is a weakness," he said. "It makes you vulnerable. It destroys you. I loved my wife more than anything, and it ruined me. It left me with nothing but pain and debt. And now, I do what I have to do to survive." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to back down. "This isn't survival," she said. "This is murder. You don't have to do this." Alexis's hand tightened around the knife, his jaw clenching. "You'd do the same if it meant saving the person you love. Don't pretend you wouldn't." Emma shook her head, her voice firm. "No, I wouldn't, because love isn't a weakness. It's what makes us strong. It's what makes life worth living." For a moment, Alexis hesitated, his expression flickering with something almost like doubt. But then his face hardened again, and he took a step closer. "You don't understand," he said. "You can't understand." Emma stood her ground, her heart pounding as she prepared to fight for Liam and for their lives. The room was cold and silent, the only sound the faint drip of water echoing in the distance. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she stood between Alexis and Liam, her hands trembling but her resolve unshaken. Alexis took another step forward, the knife glinting in his hand, his expression dark and unreadable. "You should have stayed away," Alexis said, his voice low and bitter. "You don't know what you've walked into." Emma's eyes darted around the room, searching for anything she could use. Her gaze landed on a metal tray sitting on a nearby table, its surface cluttered with surgical abilities. Without thinking, she grabbed it and hurled it at Alexis. The tray clattered loudly as it hit his arm, making him stumble back slightly. "Stay away from him," Emma shouted, her voice shaking but fierce. Alexis's face twisted with anger, and he lunged toward her. Emma dodged, her heart racing as she grabbed a chair and swung it in his direction. The chair caught him in the side, and he let out a grunt of pain, dropping the knife. It clattered to the floor, and Emma kicked it away as hard as she could, sending it skidding across the room. "You're making a mistake," Alexis growled, clutching his side. "You don't understand what's at stake." "I don't care," Emma shouted back, her voice filled with fury. "You don't get to hurt people and call it survival." She grabbed a heavy glass jar from a nearby shelf and threw it at him. It shattered against the wall, missing him by inches, but the distraction gave her enough time to move toward Liam. He was still slumped in the chair, his head hanging low, but she could see his chest rising and falling. He was alive. "Liam," she whispered, her hands fumbling with the restraints around his wrists. "Wake up. Please wake up." Alexis recovered quickly, his footsteps heavy as he moved toward her again. Emma grabbed a metal pole leaning against the wall and swung it wildly, forcing him to back off. She used the moment to free Liam's hands, her fingers trembling as she worked the knots loose. "Emma," Liam's voice was weak, barely audible, but it was enough to make her heart leap. "I'm here," she said, her voice breaking. "We're getting out of here." She freed his ankles just as Alexis lunged again. This time, Emma ducked and swung the pole upward, catching him under the chin. He stumbled back, dazed, and Emma grabbed Liam's arm, pulling him to his feet. "Come on," she said urgently. "We have to go." Liam leaned heavily on her, his legs weak, but he managed to stay upright. Together, they moved toward the door, Emma glancing over her shoulder to make sure Alexis wasn't following. She spotted a heavy metal cabinet near the wall and, with all the strength she could muster, pushed it in front of the door, trapping Alexis inside. The sound of Alexis pounding on the door echoed behind them as they stumbled into the hallway. "You can't run forever," he shouted, his voice filled with rage. "You think this is over? It's not." Emma ignored him, her focus entirely on getting Liam out of the building. The corridors seemed to stretch endlessly, each one darker and more confusing than the last. Liam was regaining his strength, but he was still unsteady, his arm draped over Emma's shoulders as they moved. "Where are we?" Liam asked, his voice hoarse. "Somewhere we're not supposed to be," Emma said, her voice tight. "But we're getting out. Just stay with me." They turned a corner, and Emma's heart sank as she heard footsteps behind them. Alexis had escaped the room, and he was coming after them. His heavy boots echoed through the halls, growing louder with every passing second. "Run," Emma said, her voice urgent. "We have to run." Liam nodded, his grip on her tightening as they picked up their pace. The building was a maze, each turn leading to another dark hallway or empty room. Emma's lungs burned, her legs aching, but she refused to stop. She could hear Alexis getting closer, his footsteps relentless. They burst into a large room filled with old, rusted equipment. Emma spotted a stack of wooden crates near the far wall and motioned for Liam to follow her. "Over here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They ducked behind the crates, their breaths coming in short, ragged gasps. Emma peeked around the corner, her heart pounding as she saw Alexis enter the room. He moved slowly, his eyes scanning the shadows, the knife back in his hand. "You can't hide forever," he called out, his voice cold and taunting. "You think you're clever, but you're not. I've been doing this for years." Emma's mind raced as she looked around for something, anything that could help them. Her eyes landed on a heavy chain hanging from the ceiling, attached to a pulley system. An idea formed in her mind, and she turned to Liam. "Can you stand on your own?" she whispered. Liam nodded, his face pale but determined. "What are you going to do?" "Just trust me," Emma said. "When I say run, you run." Before Liam could protest, Emma stepped out from behind the crates, her heart pounding. "Hey!" she shouted, drawing Alexis's attention. "Looking for me?" Alexis turned, his eyes narrowing as he moved toward her. "You're braver than most," he said, his voice low. "But bravery won't save you." Emma backed up slowly, leading him toward the chain. She waited until he was directly beneath it, then grabbed the chain and pulled with all her strength. The pulley creaked loudly, and a heavy metal beam came crashing down, knocking Alexis to the ground. "Run!" Emma shouted, grabbing Liam's arm. They bolted for the door, their footsteps echoing through the building. Behind them, Alexis let out a furious roar, but he didn't follow. Emma didn't look back, her focus entirely on getting them out. The cool night air hit them like a wave as they burst out of the building, their lungs burning and their bodies trembling. Emma spotted the cab still waiting at the edge of the road and waved frantically. "Go, go, go!" she shouted as they climbed into the back seat. The driver didn't ask questions. He slammed on the gas, the car speeding away from the building. Emma held Liam tightly, her hands shaking as she tried to process what had just happened. "We need to call the police," she said, her voice trembling. "We have to stop this." Liam nodded weakly, his head resting against her shoulder. "You saved me," he whispered. "I don't know how, but you did." Emma kissed his forehead, tears streaming down her face. "I wasn't going to lose you," she said. "Not to him." When they reached the nearest police station, Emma and Liam told the officers everything. They handed over the passports Emma had found, describing the medical equipment and the horrors inside the building. The police promised to investigate, and within hours, a raid was launched. But when the authorities arrived at the building, Alexis was gone. The equipment was still there, the evidence of his crimes undeniable, but the man himself had vanished. Emma felt a mix of relief and frustration. The operation had been exposed, but Alexis was still out there. In a dimly lit room far from the city, Alexis sat across from a group of men, his hat in his hands. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. The leader of the gang leaned back in his chair, his expression cold and unfeeling. "You failed," the man said, his voice sharp, "and now you're out of time." Alexis's hands trembled as he looked up at them. "Please," he said, his voice breaking, "just give me more time. I'll get the money. I'll do whatever it takes." The leader's expression didn't change. "We warned you what would happen if you didn't deliver. Your daughter." Alexis's breath hitched, his entire body shaking. "No," he whispered. "Please don't hurt her. She's all I have." The leader stood, his shadow looming over Alexis. "You made your choice," he said coldly. "Now you live with it." The hotel room was quiet, the soft hum of the city outside barely audible through the closed window. Emma sat on the edge of the bed, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea the hotel staff had brought up for her. She hadn't touched it, though. Her hands were still trembling, her mind replaying everything that had happened. The dark corridors, Alexis's cold voice, the sound of Liam's weak breaths as she freed him. It all felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Liam was sitting beside her, his head resting against the wall. He looked pale and exhausted, but he was alive. That was all that mattered to Emma. She glanced at him, her heart aching at the sight of the faint bruises on his wrists where the restraints had been. He caught her looking and gave her a small, tired smile. "I'm sorry," he said softly, his voice hoarse, "for everything, for putting you through this." Emma shook her head, setting the cup down on the nightstand. "Don't," she said firmly. "Don't apologize. None of this was your fault." Liam sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I just wanted to do something special for you. I thought I could surprise you, make you happy. And instead, You didn't do anything wrong," Emma interrupted, her voice breaking. She reached for his hand, holding it tightly. "You were trying to do something kind, something thoughtful. You couldn't have known what would happen. And I would do it all over again if it meant saving you." Liam looked at her, his eyes filled with guilt and love. "You shouldn't have had to," he said. "You shouldn't have been the one to save me." Emma smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair out of his face. "That's what love is, Liam. We take care of each other. You would have done the same for me." He nodded, his throat tightening as he pulled her into a hug. They sat there for a long time, holding each other, the weight of the day slowly beginning to lift. The world outside felt far away, and for the first time in hours they felt safe. The next morning, the sunlight streaming through the window felt warmer, softer, as if the city itself was trying to comfort them. Emma and Liam moved around the room quietly, packing their bags. Neither of them said much, but the silence wasn't heavy. It was the kind of silence that came from understanding, from knowing that words weren't always necessary. As Emma folded one of her dresses and placed it in her suitcase, her hand brushed against something tucked into the corner. She frowned, pulling it out, and her breath caught in her throat. It was a small, carefully wrapped package. She glanced at Liam, who was zipping up his own bag, and then back at the package. Slowly, she unwrapped it, her hands trembling slightly. Inside was a painting, the one she had fallen in love with at the gallery. The couple standing hand in hand under a starry sky, their faces turned toward each other as if the rest of the world didn't exist. Emma stared at it, her heart swelling with emotion. "Liam," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He looked up, his eyes widening when he saw what she was holding. "You found it," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You bought it?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. "When? How?" Liam rubbed the back of his neck, looking sheepish. "I went back to the gallery yesterday morning before everything happened. I wanted to surprise you. I thought it would be the perfect way to remember this trip." Emma's eyes filled with tears as she looked at him. "You did all of this for me?" Liam nodded, his smile fading slightly. "I just wanted to make you happy. I didn't know it would lead to all of this." Emma set the painting down carefully and crossed the room, wrapping her arms around him. "You do make me happy," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You always do, and this is perfect. It's beautiful." They stood there for a moment, holding each other, the painting resting on the bed beside them. It felt like a symbol of everything they had been through, the fear, the pain, the love that had carried them through it all. It wasn't just a painting anymore. It was a reminder of their strength, of the bond that had only grown stronger in the face of everything they had endured. When they returned home, the first thing Emma did was find a place for the painting. She hung it in their living room, right above the small bookshelf where they kept their favorite novels and travel guides. The soft glow of the evening light made the stars in the painting seem to shimmer, and Emma couldn't help but smile every time she looked at it. Liam came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist as they stood in front of it. "It looks good there," he said, resting his chin on her shoulder. "It looks perfect," Emma said, leaning back against him. "Every time I see it, I'll think of us, of how far we've come." Liam kissed her temple, his arms tightening around her. "I don't know what I'd do without you," he said softly. "You'll never have to find out," Emma replied, turning to face him. "We're in this together, always." They stood there for a long time, the painting a quiet reminder of their love and resilience. The ordeal they had faced would always be a part of their story, but it didn't define them. What defined them was the way they had fought for each other, the way they had refused to give up, even when the odds were against them. As the evening turned to night, Emma and Liam sat together on the couch, the painting glowing softly in the background. They didn't need to say anything. Their love, their bond was stronger than ever, and that was all that mattered.